Hi, everybody. Welcome to First Chapter Friday from Distance Learning. I'm in my apartment on my Ottoman poof, and I'm here to share a book with you. As you can see, this Friday's book is Everneath by Brodi Ashton. This book came recommended to me by one of my students. She said, Miss Hopkins, I have read the books on your shelf. You have to read this. And so I threw it on my to-read list, and I think I finished it in 3 days. Overall, I think I would give this book a 3 out of 5. I think there's a lot that the author is trying to fit into this book that really takes more than one book to explain. Thankfully, it is a series, so if we scroll down, you can see that there are 2 other books in this series. So maybe if you pick it up and you like it, this is a series you read during social distancing, right? So this is a young adult fantasy. It does deal with elements of mythology and does have elements of romance in it. If you like Greek mythology and you know the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, this book is a modern retelling of that myth. And as a Greek mythology fan, I loved it. So I'm going to read you a little bit out of this book. Feel free to just give me your ears, just listen. If this is a nice, relaxing time for you, put in some headphones and just chill. Okay? So here's a selection from Everneath by Brodi Ashton. Chapter 1. Now, Park City High School, 5.5 months of my return left. It was too soon, but really I'd been gone for 100 years. Everything about my old life would feel like it was coming at me too soon, especially high school. I stepped through the doors of Park City High and nearly choked on the smell of fresh paint. I glanced around. None of the other students seemed to be affected by it, but it made my eyes water. The halls of the high school looked the same, reminding me that above ground, far above the Everneath, only 6 months had passed while I was away. Time moves differently in the Everneath. 100 years to me was just months on the surface. Everything was the same, and everything was different. A banner hung above the entrance to the upper class hall. Park City High, home of the miners. Right then, a few large boys dressed in football jerseys and jeans ran under the sign, jumping and high-fiving the miners' chisel as they went. Junior year. A waste of time in one respect, considering I'd never make it to the end of the year, let alone graduation. I only had 6 months before the tunnels came for me. But I needed to be here, needed to glimpse for a moment the life I had before, the year I should have had, to see Jack one last time despite how we left things, to see my family again. This was my chance to say goodbye. It was a chance I didn't get last time. I scanned the hallway searching for his face, but looked down quickly after catching a few questioning stares. I knew he was here somewhere in the building. The thought gave me goosebumps. At least I had enough emotions left inside me to even get goosebumps. Blushes and chills didn't take much. I'd recovered them about a week ago, along with all of my memories. But it was the stronger emotions, the ones that produced laughter and tears, that eluded me still. I glanced down at my schedule. First period English literature. As I checked the room numbers at the tops of the doors, curious whispers floated along the hall behind me, hanging in the air above my head. Isn't that Nikki Beckett? She looks awful. Is she still using? Has to be. What else would do that to a person? Poor Jack. Does he know she's back? Does he know she's strung out? When I found the right room, I clutched my books to my chest, lowered my head, and walked through the door. Someone, probably the new English teacher, called from near the front of the classroom. Miss Beckett, is it? I heard my own last name. Hearing my own last name did strange things to my heart, made it beat a little faster, a little harder. It had been so long since I'd had a last name. For 100 years, Cole had called me only by my first name. It was how the ever-living treated their forfeits. If you didn't have a last name, you didn't have a life outside the Everneath. No, nothing to want to come back to. Maybe that was why he was so surprised when I chose to return. I stopped just inside the doorway and lifted my head toward the teacher, keeping a few strands of hair in front of my eyes as I nodded in response. Welcome. She hesitated as she took in my appearance. People did that a lot. My dad told me it was because I looked like a malnourished animal, ready to sprint. I'd lost a lot of weight, and my dark hair no longer held any curls. The principal told me to expect you. I'm Mrs. Stone. I see you have the textbook. I nodded again. There's an empty chair in the back there, and here's a supplemental book on mythology. She pointed toward the rear of the classroom, but I kept my gaze on her. You'll have to work hard to catch up with the rest of the class. I turned and shuffled down the middle row until I reached the empty place at the back. Once seated, I took out my notebook and pencil and leaned forward over my desk so my hair created a curtain on either side of my face. I could do this, but I could taste the curiosity in the air. Literally. Cole used to tell me that the Everneath would change me, make me more in tune with the emotions of others because I was so empty of my own. Now that I was back, I could taste emotions hanging around me. Certain emotions were stronger than others and would hit me when I wasn't ready. Like when my dad told me he was so happy I was back and that he didn't blame me, but his disappointment in the air tasted as strong as a clump of salt. It wasn't so easy to identify most of them, except when an entire group was feeling the same thing. Like now. 30 people in a room, all curious. But as the class settled in for a lecture, one emotion, separate from the curiosity, floated to the top of the rest. I couldn't figure out what it was. It would have been easier if I'd been prepared. Hi, a familiar voice said from the desk next to mine. I startled. Sorry. It was him, Jack, the boy who had gotten me through hell. I wasn't expecting him to be in my first class of the day. Here he was, my reason for returning. But any words I used to know got caught in my throat. I wanted to run toward him and run away from him at the same time, laugh and cry. Instead, I froze. All this way just to see him, and I'd never planned for what to do next. Jack's voice sounded flat. Or more that he tried to make it sound flat. Maybe I was the only one who would have picked up on that. I kept my head down, took a deep breath, and picked the easiest of the words that were stuck in my throat. I exhaled as slowly as I could, and the word slipped out. Hi. The word had no accompanying voice to it, just the escaping air behind my lips. He turned away from me to focus on Mrs. Stone. I wondered how I was going to get through the hour. I took notes furiously, transcribing every word Mrs. Stone said. Since my return, my emaciated muscles made my hands shake, and I looked for ways to keep them busy. It was part of the reason I took up knitting. In the 2 weeks that had passed since I walked out of the shop and go and back through the door of my father's home, I had knitted an entire wardrobe's worth of clothes, a few dog sweaters for my neighbor, and a handful of toaster cozies. You know, things that you could be doing during social distancing. Just a thought. Mrs. Stone spoke animatedly about the role of the hero in mythology. When she asked the class for their favorite stories or figures from myths, several students raised their hands. A large kid in the back said, Hercules. Another boy wearing Mathletes are athletes too shirt said, Aphrodite. People laughed. I didn't know why. It seemed to be an inside joke, and I was an outsider. Then a blonde girl in the front row raised her hand and said, Hades and Persephone? I couldn't help flipping forward in the textbook to the story. I didn't know why it would be anybody's favorite. According to the myth, Hades, the god of the underworld, fell in love with Persephone, kidnapped her, and tried to make her his queen. When he tricked her into eating 6 pomegranate seeds, she was bound to the underworld for 6 months out of every year. Kidnapping and imprisonment, it was a horrible myth. I wondered where her hero had been. Jack's leg bounced up and down, distracting me. I wanted to reach over and put my hand on his knee and tell him that everything would be okay, but that was impossible. I stared harder at my paper and tried not to think about Jack's leg. The bell to end class startled me, and I dropped my pencil. It bounced to the floor towards Jack's desk. I froze. Maybe he hadn't noticed. I'd wait and get it when the rest of the class left. I stayed perfectly still. The room cleared out, but I couldn't sense any movement from the desk next to mine. Before I could stop myself, I looked up. He was there, motionless, holding my pencil in his hand, watching me. My eyes drank in the sight of him even as my body fought the urge to bolt. His hair was the same rich brown color, but it was longer and shaggier than before, and his face had lost any signs of baby fat, making me think that his mom had stopped forcing meatball sandwiches down his throat like she used to during football season. His eyes were exactly as I'd remembered, exactly as I pictured every day for the past 100 years. Chocolate. But there was one difference. A single steel post pierced one of his eyebrows. It wouldn't have belonged on his face a year ago, but somehow fit the face looking at me now. This face was edgier. This face had been through something. He was beautiful. I started to tremble. It took all of my strength, which wasn't very much, not to run out the door. He'd obviously waited for me to look at him. Like his voice, his face held no easily identifiable emotion to pinpoint. No love, no hate. He held out my pencil for me. I reached over and grabbed it, my fingers brushing lightly against the palm of his hand. I could hear my own intake of breath. He didn't flinch in the slightest. He didn't draw his hand back. Mr. Caputo? Miss Beckett? Mrs. Stone called from the front of the classroom. Are you waiting for something? No, Mrs. Stone, Jack said, keeping his curious eyes on mine. Just saying hi to an old friend. I gathered up my books and tried not to think about how it used to be. So like I said, I don't think I said this, but I listened to this as an audiobook. I didn't like the woman who narrated the audiobook, but reading it again in my own voice, I like it a lot better. So I would give this 3 out of 5. It's pretty interesting. Where do we go? There we go. It's pretty interesting. I know that Durkee Library has it, so I'm pretty sure Sora might have it, but you'd have to check. But anyway, thank you to Autumn for recommending this book to me. It was a great way to pass some time the last few days, especially with all of the driving that I did. So if you are interested, again, this is Everneath by Brodi Ashton, and I hope that you enjoyed this first chapter Friday.